Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So I'm super excited about this panel. I think Ileana Green is amazing, and I'm so excited to be working with her and excited about this panel. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you guys about social justice and what's going on in the cannabis world. As you know, I am joined this afternoon by Craig Cecil, Mary Jane Gibson, Sherry Sicard, as well as Ms. Roz McCarthy and Kyle Kazan. So I'm going to turn it over to each of them to give a brief introduction, and then we're going to get into the conversation today.
Okay, I'll jump in there. Hi, everybody. I'm Sherry Sicard. I'm a grassroots activist, and as you heard in the intro, if you were listening, I'm an advocate for federal prisoners that are serving life sentences for marijuana. So I'm here to talk about that and grassroots activism.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Jane. I'm the former culture editor at High Times Magazine. I've been traveling the world tracking legalization of medical marijuana and adult use cannabis since 2007, interviewing all kinds of folks in all kinds of walks of life. I'm also the co-host of the cannabis and comedy podcast Weed and Grub with comedian Mike Glazer. And I now contribute as a freelance writer to several outlets, including Rolling Stone, Green Entrepreneur, and others. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
If I can jump in, I'm Kyle Kazan. I'm the CEO of Glass House Group. And prior to that, in my old life, I was in law enforcement. And for many more years than I was in law enforcement, I was an active member of LEAP, which used to be Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, now is Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And I am vehemently opposed to the drug war in the United States.
Hello, I'm Craig Cecil. I don't know why my face isn't up there, but hopefully we can figure that out. But I am a federal prisoner, and I've been a prisoner, as you heard in my intro, since shortly after September 11th. And I'm on home confinement now, and in my over 18 years in federal prison, I've seen a whole lot. As a matter of fact, I just left behind a cellmate who just last summer was sentenced to 18 years for having 200 kilos of marijuana in Wisconsin. I've watched a whole lot of people come and go in federal prison, and I've watched how drug offenders, as a rule, get about 3 times more sentence time than violent offenders. And I'm hoping to help to make a change to that.
And my name, as you all know, is Ileana Green. I'm a reentry attorney at Root and Rebound out in Oakland, California. My work is sponsored by Hewlett Packard Enterprise in Morgan Lewis. We help folks navigate collateral consequences to having a criminal record. And my work also involves engaging with the cannabis community to make sure that our understanding of corporate social responsibility centers those who have been most harmed by cannabis prohibition. So we're gonna get into the conversation today. So I know that a lot of what folks know about the war on drugs is through narratives that are portrayed in the media. What role do you all think that the media plays in addressing the war on drugs? And with that in mind, what does responsible cannabis journalism look like?
I'll jump in on that one. I saw a note in the chat that people found it hard to hear me. Can you all hear me a little better now? You can hear me okay? Okay, good. So I learned to write about cannabis at High Times Magazine when it was still really an underground magazine, and it was covering the war on drugs from an anti-establishment perspective. So I feel very fortunate because I learned to talk about the war on drugs in a way that many writers do not. Most writers who are writing for mainstream outlets were really steeped in the anti-drug war or anti-drug propaganda of the 80s and 90s. You know, many people who are my age grew up with the DARE program in school. So whether or not they realize it, as reporters, they're coming from a place of sometimes unconscious and sometimes conscious bias. And I feel very fortunate that I got an education in writing about cannabis from the other side of the coin. So now I think what our job really is, as cannabis is coming into truly the mainstream media, and we have outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times covering cannabis, responsible journalism really has to include educating yourself about all aspects of the war on drugs, all aspects of the plant, of the industry, of the people who are suffering from the systemic racism of the war on drugs, of the people who are serving prison sentences, who are incarcerated. So that means that there's a lot of work to do for anyone who's writing about cannabis, first and foremost, before they start to write about it. And there are so many wonderful resources, like all of you folks, who I hope can, share with me and other journalists who might watch this, like how to start telling the story. And a big part of it for me right now, especially in light of what's going on, is listening and learning and talking to the people who have especially suffered from the penalties incurred by the war on drugs.
All of that is very true, especially because that's largely what we're consuming and how we are viewing this very real issue. I know that we've been having tech issues all day in the world of Zoom, but I would like to introduce Ms. Roz McCarthy and allow her to give a short spiel about herself.
Hi, I'm Roz McCarthy. Sorry for being late. Had some tech issues. And actually, I was on at 2:15 my time, which was earlier this morning. So I got a chance to pop on again. But I'm the founder and the CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based out of Florida. We have 27 chapters throughout the country and 3 international chapters. And 2 historically Black colleges and universities has a chapter of our organization on their campus. So if you look at the way I like to talk about M4MM, we were established in 2016. We are the grassroots people that are dealing, so when you are saying, hey, who's talking to people that are having these issues that that have been incarcerated, who are seeing that they're having issues get into the industry, we are touching them at the grassroots level with our boot camps and with our community forums. So we're the ones that are kind of helping them to figure out what's your, how to navigate through all of the just tremendous growth that we see in cannabis. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you for joining us. And so you mentioned that there's growth going on in cannabis. Many of our viewers are in California or New York or regions of the country where marijuana is legal or moving towards legalization. So in the age of marijuana legalization, can you all talk about how marijuana arrests fit into the unjust and unbalanced criminal justice system that we have here in the States? For example, how does someone get a life sentence for marijuana? And what can we do to help people currently incarcerated for those types of convictions?
I'll take that one. I think this is a subject that's really misunderstood, and I think Craig can talk about it more, but the public really doesn't understand that we have non-violent offenders serving life sentences. And one of the most challenging things to overcome is just to get people to believe that. They always assume there's more to the story. There's got to be a dead body there somewhere. You're not telling me something. But the fact is, it's conspiracy laws that put people like Craig behind bars for life sentences, and the public doesn't understand 2 important things about that. It takes no actual evidence to be convicted, just the word of somebody else who's usually trying to avoid prison time themselves. And that's all it takes to get a conviction. And also the fact, and I know Craig can talk about this a lot, the law holds everybody involved equally responsible, regardless of how much or how little they did. So that's how a first-time offender got a life sentence for marijuana in Craig's case. Also, there's a challenge with the media too, because as an activist and trying to get support for this, the challenge in dealing with the media on this issue is one, the same thing, they find it hard to believe, but even if we get them past that, access to these prisoners is so restricted. Like, it's impossible to get a film crew into federal prison, so they don't have a story anymore if there's nothing to film, or even a photographer or a journalist. So that's a challenge too.
So if I can jump in.
But there are people coming out that are, I mean, just respectfully, there are people that are coming out that have been incarcerated. We talk to them and they're looking for an opportunity, and there's no type of support from a rehabilitation and from imagine being incarcerated for the last 12 years for a joint, and it's disproportionately Black people, Black men. And I think we need to be really candid about that and go to where individuals are and be able to lend a hand to say, okay, let me show you where there's opportunities. And because if we can't tell their stories on the inside, they're ready to tell their stories now.
Mhm.
You know, at the end of the day, it does take money to really help push this along. And so, for instance, I don't know if you guys have heard about the menthol bans going around, but there's a woman named Sheila Thorne who has collected people on a grassroots basis, but it's big tobacco that's assisting in that. It's money needs to help percolate to get this thing going. When it comes to marijuana, given the fact that this is now a legal industry in 33 states, it's beyond me that we as an industry aren't coming together and pooling some resources, and a lot of us have political clout, to make this more obvious through press releases, through our own demonstrations, and bringing light to this ourselves. You know, there's a whole lot of injustice in the entire law enforcement system that we could shine a light on. But since we're talking here about marijuana today, there are billions of dollars of equity being created, and companies are now starting to become profitable. So the fact is that I, as a CEO of a very large company here in California, am literally violating the same federal law openly that people are serving life sentence to, is absolutely insane. And so I'm happy to come on here in this panel and say, look, let's do more. Let's actually make some concrete steps. Let's be some agents for change, and let's start calling out the cannabis companies and their investors to say, let's start opening the doors for these folks. This is absolutely insane that anybody is serving even a day more for what shouldn't even be a crime anymore. Should never have been a crime, but shouldn't be a crime.
And Kyle, I think that's an important point that you point out, that a lot of these charges are at the federal level. I think a lot of the misunderstanding is folks are saying, you know, it's legal in this state, it's legal in that state next to me, but people are getting federal charges, which is very serious. And I think that it's very important that we listen to those with lived experience on these topics as well, in terms of the direction that we need to go. On that note, Craig, did you want to share anything on this topic?
Well, I think unfortunately the law enforcement won't back away from the drug charges because they're so easy to prosecute. Most of the drug charges, especially the bigger ones like mine, are prosecuted as a conspiracy. And all it takes to convict somebody of a conspiracy is one witness, usually, sometimes they'll use two, to say that somebody agreed to commit a marijuana crime with them. And that's all it takes to convict them. In my case, they admitted that I never had marijuana, never gained any money from marijuana, but I did fix trucks for a Florida trucking company that used their trucks to haul marijuana. That put me in the conspiracy, and although I had no prior criminal record at all, under the U.S. sentencing guidelines, that netted me a life sentence. And then
Real quick, if I can just add real quick, Craig, what's pushing behind, like what pushed the law enforcement towards Craig? It's civil asset forfeiture. So there's a lot of law enforcement budgets that are made by the drug war. And so you go ahead and you convict a man like Craig for fixing trucks, you might be able to take all those trucks and sell them. And so literally, if you look into the budgets of both federal and local law enforcement, they fund themselves through the drug war. So I would say follow the money all the way along. Sorry, Craig, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But I think it's just too easy for federal officials to prosecute these. And unfortunately, that they're still hanging on to that 1980s image that violent crime comes from drugs. And I mean, although that's been debunked for all these years, that violent crime and drugs aren't really intrinsically linked.
But it wasn't violent crimes. It was, you guys, I mean, it wasn't violent crimes. The war on drugs was to suppress the Black community and Black individuals, and it was utilized in order to it was trying to arrest the hippies who were going against the war, and then also to disintegrate the Black communities that were fighting against for civil rights, right?
Right. And I think that Kyle brings up a very important point of following the money. I think it's important to realize that in California and several other states, a portion of legal cannabis taxes are allocated to public safety, which is code for policing. And to realize that these same policies that folks in the legal cannabis industry might be benefiting from are still ultimately used to oppress others as they're literally funding policing. And so with that in mind, what do you all think is the responsibility of folks in the cannabis? What responsibility do folks in the cannabis industry have to continue to fight for legalization? Also, what responsibility do they have to push to reallocate their funds so they're not allocated to continuing to perpetuate the war on drugs? And finally, what do they need to do to really help those who've been most affected by the war on drugs? I know that was a big question, y'all. But we could dissect that a little bit at a time. Maybe if we want to start with what is the obligation to help those who have been most harmed by the war on drugs?
Well, I mean, I think the industry as a whole, there should be just a reality check and an honest conversation about, that the industry was built on the back of individuals who have paid a price and paid their lives. And so I think having that real honest conversation. And then I agree with Kyle, when you're in a leadership position and you know how the industry was built and you know that you have an opportunity, I mean, there's ways to do well in the industry, but also to make sure that you leave some type of social impact and make changes. And I think the cannabis industry, out of any industry, housing, banking, telecommunications, the .com industry, we have an opportunity to really show how you can reach back and do some really good social good. And I think that has to be an attitude and a commitment from the top down. And once you see that, I think you'll see the needle move in a really good direction.
And I think as cannabis consumers, we also have to support the companies that are doing that and are acting in a responsible way. So everybody has a responsibility, the businesses and the consumers.
Yeah, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. I think Portland is a great example of, in the midst of everyone crying to defund the police, cannabis out there said, we don't want you using our taxes towards policing. And the next day, $12 million was literally reallocated to communities of color, public, as well as community benefits. So I think that moving, as a multi-billion-dollar industry, you're able to influence how your money and how your taxes is spent. So voicing that that's important to you is one of the first steps.
And just on that note, I'd just like to add a lot of people are, looking for companies to support who are conscious and accountable. And there is a great list at CanNclusive. They have an accountability list where you can actually go before you spend your money, take a look at that and look at the brands that are supporting the movement and look at the brands that are minority owned and the brands that you might not want to give your money to because they are not operating in a way that you want to support. So that's at CanNclusive.com, the accountability list. It's a great resource for conscious consumers.
I think the future is also you're going to see some movement where there's going to be some groups or an organization or an outside entity that looks at social equity brands and being, how you get like an FDA certification or you get that kind of seal. Can you imagine if you had those type of brands that were on shelves and that when you went in to go and look for your product or whatever you're looking for, that you as a consumer has the opportunity of being able to pick and choose. When we get that opportunity, and that's why Sherry and also Mary Jane, you're right. I think you're right on target. If we can be able to eyeball that from a real-time experience when you walk into a retail establishment, I think that would be something really huge.
Yeah, I think there's nothing more powerful than voting with your wallet in pretty much any situation. Follow the money. So
absolutely,
we all have a responsibility there.
Absolutely.
So earlier, Sherry, you spoke about how someone can get a life sentence for a marijuana-related offense. Can you share a little bit about what the most challenging parts of advocating for incarcerated people serving life sentences may be?
Well, yeah, I mean, I touched on it earlier. It's just that people really don't believe it. They are, the public is inundated with headlines telling them that marijuana is legalized and prisoners are released. And the popular conception among people who really don't follow this issue is really nobody gets arrested for marijuana anymore. Nobody's really in jail for marijuana anymore. If they are, they had other charges or something else that put them there. So that is the biggest hurdle to overcome. Number one is just getting people to take it seriously and believe it, because it is so unbelievable that you can have a nonviolent first-time offender like Craig. He's not the only one. John Knock has not one but 2 life sentences. He's a first-time offender. All of the prisoners I worked are nonviolent offenders, and just their previous charges were usually also for marijuana, so if they had any at all. So that's just a huge misconception to get over before you can even start to have a conversation with it, is to get somebody to take you seriously. And again, as I said, when it comes to trying to promote this cause, the fact that the media really can't get access to these prisoners is a big challenge. I know we can get them access through email. Craig has certainly corresponded with a lot of reporters over the years who I've hooked him up with, and other activists have as well. But that's about all the access a reporter is going to get to a federal prisoner. And that's, when you're a news director trying to get ratings, that's very sexy, you know? So that's a challenge too.
So a lot of what I'm hearing is a misportrayal in the media in what we're consuming. Earlier, Mary Jane spoke about what responsible cannabis journalism looks like. I was wondering if you all could share with viewers any sources for journalists, writers, PR firms, or other public outreach firms to learn about cannabis advocacy and social equity.
I will tell you, my favorite is Tom Angel at Marijuana Moment. I think he is, straightforward. He was, when I was involved early in my time at LEAP, he was there at LEAP, and he's done an excellent job, and he calls people to the carpet on all sides of the aisle. He doesn't care. So I would highly recommend looking into Marijuana Moment. The other thing is, it's hard when you're giving interviews. It's so easy to get cheeky about marijuana and Cheech and Chong and all that. And I think that the danger with doing that is that we're forgetting that this is a medicine. We're forgetting that most people that grew up here in the United States have used it, including most police officers have admitted to it. They've used it. And so the idea that we have people serving hard time, life sentences, is unbelievable. And then, as much as I would like to agree with the panel of, hey, if we shine more lights, people will care. I don't know if you guys remember, but President Obama was the first sitting president to visit a federal penitentiary, and he did shine a light on it. And nothing happened, including, and I don't mean to tear into the former president, but if there was one thing that was really disappointed, he didn't take out that pen before he dropped the microphone and released tons of people for unjust crimes or unjust sentences for these crimes, and which, by the way, shouldn't have been crimes. So I want to make sure I don't get hammered on that. So I think, if you ask me, who went through the first Los Angeles riots and watched the placation, watched the politicians doing exactly what they're doing right now, which is just trying to not get yanked out of office themselves, will say and do anything to just get through it. But then, I was working in South Central, nothing changed very quickly. It was just a slow change. A lot of people down there will tell you, hasn't really changed. So I think here we have a very interesting opportunity where we are building up a multi-billion-dollar industry that will soon be federally legal. And when that happens, you're going to see all the major companies from outside of cannabis come in. This is the time right now where people like myself from small and big companies are violating the same federal laws. This is the time to rally as a group and go to our politicians and say, enough is enough, or we're going to shine a light on you. We're going to pick on you. And that's how you get change, because I'll take that placation all day long if they start introducing bills in Congress to let these folks out and expunge their records. Sorry if I'm a little passionate about it.
I just want to add to, yes, absolutely. Tom Angel at Marijuana Moment is doing wonderful coverage. And for some other great responsible cannabis journalism, I think the Politico reporters are doing an incredible job. They're exposing some of the hypocrisies at the heart of the corporate cannabis industry. And that's also important to note and know about, because essentially right now we're covering the Wild West in a lot of ways. There are no playbooks, there are no ground rules. And so to be a responsible cannabis journalist, you have to truly, depend on your sources and vet them first. And there are a lot of PR firms out there who are sort of capitalizing on this new industry and sending out a lot of press releases about companies that aren't necessarily scrupulous. They're certainly hopping on the CBD bandwagon, as we're all seeing. So I love to trust my PR firms that I know are going to point me in the right direction. I always shout out Zoe Wilder. She's doing wonderful work in Los Angeles, or Evan Nyson is doing great work on the East Coast with Nice & Co. And also just, I think every journalist really has a responsibility to educate themselves on the history of the war on drugs. Join NORML, go to a local meetup, find out about what's happening in your community before you start speaking on something that you really don't want to get it wrong right now. And so I would just say to anyone who wants to write about cannabis right now, it's a very important time to get certain things in place that are correct as the foundations for what could become a really cool career, and you could do a lot of good work with it, but you could also do a lot of harm by telling the wrong story.
True.
Also, there is Gia Marone with GVM Communications out of New York. Great African American, Latina PR firm that does great stories. And not only does she do great stories, she helps the writers who are looking to write authentic stories. She helps them to identify individuals who are going to tell authentic stories and have messaging and have information that's going to be that's been sourced and that's been vetted. And so I just want to make sure again, Black and brown businesses want to be a part of the ecosystem, and they want to be a part of it and tell their stories, and they want to be able to have an opportunity to really shine a light on what the challenges are. And so that's where my focus is trying to help them uplift their voices. So she's a great one to refer to.
And Roz, you alluded to it earlier, but so the Nixon administration, members of the Nixon administration later on essentially admitted that the war on drugs was intentionally created to dismantle the Black community. About 2 years ago, statistics showed that about 81% of ownership in the cannabis community was white. Why is there such a lack of diversity? So considering that most of those who've been harmed by cannabis prohibition are Black, but those who are most benefiting are white. Why is there such a lack of diversity in this multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry, and how can that be remedied?
Well, that's a loaded question. That's a two-part question. The first issue is policy. When you legalize and you create and you start regulating an industry, you have legislators who are responsible for legislating and for putting in policy to manage that industry. Things like the Fair Banking Act, lots of policy that's out there. And unfortunately, some of the policy that was established early on was established to clearly leave Black and brown people out of it. For example, Florida had a 30-year nurseryman requirement when 40 years ago, they weren't recognizing African-American farmers. They had so many different really weird requirements where you had to have a $5 million surety bond. Your application fee was $60,000. So if you don't tell me that that's a clear indication of trying to redline people out of the industry, that's what happened. And so, and it's been going on. And if we don't shake up policy and make sure that we put and regulate in a way and write policy that's going to be incorporated and inclusive of everyone, it's hard. Anytime you go into a state, you have a vertical business model where you have to do everything from seed to sale. You are basically pushing out a small, mid-size, or maybe a Black or brown owned company who wants to come into the marketplace. And then the solutions, that's a huge another conversation, but I want to make sure I let my panelists also share in on their thoughts.
I watched in Illinois, where I live, the beginning of the year, they started recreational marijuana sales this year. Now, they issued licenses last November in Chicago based on a lottery system, but that lottery system was rigged. The first of the year, when it was time to start selling recreational marijuana in Chicago, there was only 11 stores licensed and opened, and they were all white owned. And there was really none in the heart of the Black neighborhoods. But the one thing that surprised me, and I still can't find an explanation for, is a Black owned company got the permit through the lobby. They were called Harborside, Illinois, and they were going to open a marijuana store in the Chatham neighborhood of Chicago, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood. The neighborhood, through its alderman, did not want the store, and they actually bucked and blocked it and kept the store out of their neighborhood. Now, why did that happen? That's what I can't figure out, when that could have brought a black-owned store to a predominantly black neighborhood.
Well, Craig, the issue why it happens is because there has to be systemically some education along with, you're talking about regulating an industry that people in the community, think about the alderman. The alderman is more, maybe an older gentleman, that has seen the war on drugs, has seen prohibition, seen how it's affected. We as Black people have a negative connotation about this plan. We don't look at it as medicine. We look at it as a tool in order to arrest our uncles and our brothers and our fathers. So, and even with Harborside, I don't know if Harborside was a majority African American owned dispensary. I would have to double check that. But even when you want to go into our neighborhood, you first have to do a lot of education and showing the efficacy and showing on the medical side. And so that's where, I'm with you. Why would you not want to bring that Black business in? But it has to be education and support, as you're also trying to bring a business that has been so polarizing for our community.
Roz,
Yeah,
if I can jump in just real quick, Roz, I think you brought in a very good point. This is a capital intensive business, no matter what, even like California, where you can just be in a strand. When you make it where it has to be vertically integrated, that puts a massive capital barrier for anybody that isn't well-heeled of any race. And then you look and you say, what about the Black and brown people in the inner cities who have been the most affected by the war on drugs? What chance do they have? I will tell you, Sue Taylor and her family started the pharmacy Berkeley, and we came in, and I know their story and how hard, and they were not a social equity. They went in there and just, found a way to make it happen, and they made deals with any capital they could, and finally it was us that got them over the finish line. And I'll tell you, in having discussions, because I think social equity is one of the ways to do it, especially if it's done where if you have been arrested for a marijuana crime and there's a socioeconomic aspect to it as well. The difficulty is when I've had discussions behind the scenes with some of the legislators in Los Angeles, they still need money. And so if you want somebody like myself to come in, there has to be a normal business relationship. And if you basically start putting barriers too high, you're going to block me out, and they're going to end up with one of the different groups of mafias that are around here that they will just loan the money, and bad things happen if things go the wrong way. So, but I think Roz is right on point that the bars need to be lower for people to participate so that you shouldn't have to raise. I think I've raised a total of $75 million. And that was my history for 24 years prior to getting into this. So I had a leg up on almost every other person. So Roz, I think you're right on point.
And Craig, I'm also from Chicago, so I understand how territorial we can be. And to Roz's point, I think that beyond there being a distrust for the politics surrounding the war on drugs, there's a distrust by Black community for the cannabis industry, which is legitimate. It's a new industry full of white billionaires. And so why would there be trust to allow this into community? And I think that a part of answering this larger question is, how do we create that trust? And how do we show that we are a part of community rather than trying to attack community?
I think a place to start really is in the churches, because I've experienced this as a grassroots activist in Los Angeles and Long Beach, and working with other activists there, both the Black communities and the Latino communities. And there really was a concentrated, organized anti-effort by the churches. One protest I organized in Long Beach comes to mind, where the Latin churches bust in people to be there on the other side. So there really needs to be a lot of education on there. And that was against a dispensary in the neighborhood. And we really tried to educate that, their argument was the children, it's going to create more access to the children. So I think a really great place to start is to educate that if you want to keep it from the children, you will want to legalize it and regulate it and have a legitimate dispensary who isn't going to give it to your children, as opposed to letting them getting it on the street where they are now. So that, in my opinion, that's a great place to start. And I'm not religious, but I think I just see so much organized opposition there.
Yeah, and Sherry, part of what I'm hearing from you is that it needs to be an intergenerational conversation. I think part of the
Absolutely.
rooting in the Black church, beyond whether or not you're religious, is that it is a space for intergenerational conversations about what needs to happen in community. And so I think that that's a great starting place for that.
And just to piggyback on that, I think another place to start is to have the members of the Black community feel heard by the people who are coming into the industry. And now is a unique moment where I think people are listening more than they have been historically. And so I just encourage anyone who has a story to tell to reach out. There are a lot of journalists and writers who are looking to amplify other people's voices and to help tell those stories. For instance, there are some great podcasts out there. You can follow my podcast, but there are other more journalistic podcasts who are looking to highlight voices from the Black community and voices of people of color who have suffered from the war on drugs. So there are just a lot of opportunities to get people to listen more than they have wanted to historically, I think, right now. And I would just start with, like following some people on Twitter who are writers and journalists and letting them know that you have a story to tell.
And that's a great point, Mary Jane.
No, I was just going to put a last plug in. This is why we have M for MM. I named it Minorities for Medical Marijuana because I specifically wanted to address a new industry. And if you looked at it, you would figure out that I am coming from a minority community and I want to and be able to have access to information, advocacy, and education. And so there's a lot of community-based organizations that are dealing with the cannabis industry that are in the Black community. And they would be your starting point. Of course, I'm going to give a big shout out to our organization, but there's many other ones that can open up that door because we have relationships with those churches and those community organizations that they're looking for resources and more information, but it's not coming there. And I would say with your stories, not only the stories about people that have suffered from the war on drugs, but there's some great stories of people, Black and brown people that have come out from a business perspective that have been able to come from a place of non-opportunity, and they're now starting to thrive. And we want to tell those really good, strong stories as well, because it's a place of encouragement and it allows people to think like, I can do it too. So I just want to make sure that point is made as well.
Yeah, and to both of y'all's points, I think that it is important to center those who have been impacted in storytelling. And I think that a part of that is realizing that telling stories of being impacted or being formerly incarcerated is labor, it is work. And they need to be compensated. Whenever we do work, we expect to get paid. So that's a part of the story too. We can't just expect folks to be reliving emotional and trying times without providing compensation, just as we're getting compensated from sharing those stories in larger outlets. So on that point, what do y'all think is the #1 factor to help move the needle economically for communities who have been most impacted by the war on drugs? We see that they've been harmed, but they're not making any of the money off of this multi-billion-dollar industry.
I would like to say, as you, oops,
Oh, go ahead.
that you go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, Chicago is very divided. Their neighborhoods are divided by so many different factors. What I'd like to see is that the licenses for the marijuana operations, as well as several other businesses, that they're issued based on where the people live. Make a system like they did for banks years ago, that a bank has to loan, most of its money within a small radius around the bank. Well, let's make it so that the people that hold the licenses for the marijuana stores actually live in those respective neighborhoods, which means they're going to hire from that neighborhood. They're going to spend their money in that they make in that neighborhood. So all in all, it's good for the neighborhood. And we need to start looking at the neighborhoods that need help rather than trying to point to people, because if you try to point to one group of person and say that this group has to take from another group, then you don't have everybody on board. But if you look at an area and say, this area needs stores that they don't have, an industry that they don't have, and encourage it by empowering the people in that area to be licensed and move ahead. And I think you can get everybody on board and everybody to agree.
And before Roz hops in, I know you wanted to share something, Roz, but I do want to highlight, especially in Chicago, the Cannabis Equity Illinois is really pushing for folks to do community benefits agreements, where you are making an agreement to do more than just the bare minimum and actually reinvest in community and hire from that community that you're taking up space from. So I think that's a really good point, that community reinvestment is needed to keep a circulation of money within communities. Go ahead, Roz.
But you'll see that sometimes with those community investment agreements that people will go and they'll put false stuff in there they're going to do and they don't follow through. I can tell you guys horror stories. I mean, from the grass where people are utilized because they live in a certain community. They put them on an application. They tell them they're going to promise them this, and then they end up getting a license. They get booted off. So I just want, what we can do is be able to educate people and provide mentorship and provide support and be realistic about this industry. I get so many people that tell me, Roz, if you just tell me what my opportunities are, but tell me what my risks are. And if you let people be able to make a judgment in regards to where they want to get in, and it's not always touching plant. And I think if we provide mentorship, provide support and resources to understand, here's a career path for you, here's an entrepreneurship path for you for touching the plant. Here's a path if you have a passion. If you are a graphic artist, if you're in a if you are have been in the security industry or what have you, here's a path that's ancillary that's needed for the industry, and then create these pathways based upon people's interests and where they really are fit versus promising the moon and not being able to deliver.
And I think that's a great point you made about a lot of the predatory practices when folks are seeking, someone to help them get their license. And I'm calling on the legal community and other communities to help folks navigate that. This is a super regulated community industry that's very hard to navigate. So education really is key.
That's another thing the public has a huge misconception about. I mean, I deal with consumers. I constantly get emails from people like, my state's legalizing, I'm going to open a restaurant, I found a location, any words of advice? The public is completely naive to what is involved in that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another point I think about moving the needle forward in the storytelling world, which is where I come from, is that the media tide is really turning. I mean, with filmmakers like Ava DuVernay making powerful films like 13, and with finally some real responsible journalism coming from major media outlets like the New York Times. Not always, sometimes they do promote voices like Alex Berenson, who I don't think should be talking about cannabis ever, but they are also doing some really good responsible reporting. And it's important to also know the difference, that just because it's in the New York Times certainly doesn't mean that it's coming from an informed point of view. So I just think that the tide is turning, and as long as we keep holding our politicians accountable. I mean, right now we have 2 presidential candidates, neither of whom is good on cannabis. So it's really important to keep working at a local level, to tell stories about representatives in your local area who are doing good things to move policy forward, and just really pay attention to the people who are making a difference wherever you are, and hopefully that'll trickle up to a federal level, because right now that whole situation is a mess.
If I can throw in just real quick, sorry, Ileana. I will tell you what I've seen in my career in some other businesses. What has really worked well is when you see, communities where they're struggling socioeconomically, Compton, South Central, different areas of Long Beach. Governments can give tax benefits to small and big businesses to hire people from those areas. And the nice thing, where Roz pointed out some, where there's fraud here, it gets audited every single year. So if you don't have somebody on the payroll living in that area, you could be looking at tax fraud charges. You could have some real problems. So that's a nice way to encourage companies to give opportunities to people that live in some more struggling neighborhoods. The other thing is, it was brought up, and I'm not sure who said it, but I think it's absolutely genius. And I really feel like in April of '92 there was a time to do things, and right now it feels like there's an interesting time again, just like there was in 1968, where we can move the needle. And one of the things, and we're coming out with this, so I don't want to fully announce it, but all businesses should provide not just internships, but paid internships for people from those same communities, because most of those folks can't afford a straight internship without getting paid, because they're just going to take a job to survive. And they need access to the C-suite. They need actual time with folks that they otherwise wouldn't get time with, to show them the path to the top of companies. Because if we do that today, 10, 15, 20 years from now, those same people will come to the C-suite. They will be the next leaders in charge, and they can pay it forward. I think that's one of the ways to change the complexion of American business. It's not just cannabis, which I understand why it should be different here in this business, but that's American business everywhere.
Overall.
And I like what you said about those tax incentives. And I'm sure that's been mentioned that ownership is hugely important. But what's also important is those who already own companies in the industry to be fair chance employers, meaning that so the law of California requires that you give folks a conditional offer of employment before inquiring about their criminal history. And that is hugely important. The cannabis industry can very easily perpetuate the war on drugs if you are excluding people inherently because they have drug-related convictions. And that's just a vicious cycle. So part of that is making sure that you're educated, reaching out to groups like us at Root and Rebound to do training on compliance with the law, as well as understanding how you can go above and beyond the law. I just shared a link to the video. We also talk about some of the tax benefits that Kyle mentioned in terms of tax benefits that you can get for hiring folks who are formerly incarcerated. So that is a huge part of the discussion.
But let's make sure it's clear. The dismantling systemic racism in cannabis is not just people that have been like incarcerated. It's people that have no record whatsoever, that are just people of color that are being overlooked for opportunities, or they're being allowed an opportunity that is beneath where their level of skill level is, and they're not getting the opportunity. Cal nailed it. If you can, not only in cannabis, throughout all the industries, but if you could create a pathway to be able to have that mentorship from someone from an executive suite level that's going to be able to help individuals be able to figure out how to track themselves and give them real opportunity. It's not just the people that have been incarcerated, it's Black people in general and brown people in general. They're just being like left out of the whole entire opportunity, the ecosystem of cannabis.
Absolutely.
And by the way, Roz, all business.
Yeah, all business. I mean, the program that you're talking about, the workforce piece that you get credit for, all that is a hub zone. The hub zone program, which is a federal contracting program or what have you, was, listen, if you employ X amount of people, and if your office resides in an area that's hub zone certified, you'll have access to bigger and better contracts. We don't have to reinvent the wheel to come up with, I mean, I'm talking on the cannabis side now, but to develop policy that's going to be more inclusive, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's policy that's already been established at the federal government contracting level that you go take it, you emulate it, and you push it out.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask folks one more general question for the group, and then I'd like for folks to share what they want folks to walk away with. What action steps do you want folks to walk away with, or what do you want folks to know? So I'm gonna ask one more question. So how do you guys think that cannabis operators and business owners can do their part as allies to ensure that the industry and its major players do their part to advance social justice in the way that we are describing? So what are some action steps that folks are saying, I want to be an ally, I'm about it, I want to do this? What are some action steps that they can do? And how can the industry make sure that they're welcoming those who have been most harmed by prohibition?
Can I jump in just really quickly first?
Yeah.
Just as a member of the media, just be careful as a brand where you spend your dollars, because there are a lot of cannabis media outlets out there who are taking brands' dollars and not doing anything to support any movement forward. So I would just be, doing some research as a cannabis brand owner and looking at where you really want to take your advertising money and, support the platforms that are supporting you back, that are, the part of the cannabis community. I mean, the industry arose from a community and now it's a huge world where we don't all feel connected anymore, but you can connect back to the community by how you spend your money with media.
Okay. Well, I'll jump in and say that any cannabis brand or any individual cannabis consumer can do a lot to support people still incarcerated for cannabis. And the war on cannabis is not truly won as long as we still have people serving time for it. So you can get involved by donating money to them, by helping them find legal help, as an individual, you can do a lot to help prisoners. Craig would not be on home confinement right now were it not for a lot of people taking action, for me not telling them what was going on and keeping his name in front of them in social media. And that's something any individual can do too. Pick a prisoner and help them get their name out there. Because of the Facebook page we had for Craig, he found long lost friends, people he went to high school with, you know, and people started following his story, and those people really made a difference. So everybody can help, whether you're a business or an individual in this regard.
Yeah, and to Sherry's point, also helping folks with reentry. Once they come home, what opportunities are there for them? How are we going to bridge the gap between opportunities that have been taken from them and those that exist currently?
Yep. I think allyship is critical. I cannot do what I do. And the passion I have is because the people that you're talking about servicing are people that look like me. They have families that look like me. Some of them are related to me. And so I think allyship is all about changing attitude, changing behavior, changing direction, changing people's lives. You know, the beautiful part about it is when you don't know something, and this is for everybody that's listening, don't assume, ask questions, but if you can use your influence, your network, your resources to make a change or to make a difference, or even when you're speaking out on your own issue, just add the issue of social equity or the disproportionality of economic opportunities in this industry. When you're having a conversation, even if it doesn't kind of go together, but it just kind of is your passion, that's an ally that we need. That your voice can be so much stronger than my voice when it comes from someone that doesn't look like me about a topic that resonates with everyone. So I encourage people that if you're in a position to help, to offer your resources, your privilege, we need it.
It's stand up and be heard, because it was a whole lot of people that made themselves heard that ended up with me walking out of prison. The warden was adamant when he looked me in the eye and told me, there's no way you're leaving. Even though you qualify under this law, there's no way you're leaving. I'm not approving anyone. And then a whole bunch of letters got written through people that follow Sherry, people that follow my daughter. And those letters went to the Attorney General, to the Director of the Bureau of Prisons, even the White House. 2 weeks later, the warden himself came back to me and he said Washington, D.C. called him and told him to reconsider his decision. He goes, put in the address you want to go to. And of the nearly 5,000 people at that prison complex, I'm the only one that left. And it's because of all that, those activism, those letters, those calls. Those actually do work. I mean, okay, maybe I'm a small victory compared to the 158,000 federal prisoners, but it's a start. And it came exactly from the grassroots action of people emailing and writing letters. It got it done. It makes a difference.
Well, if everyone is okay with that question, I want to give everyone an opportunity to share out what do you want the audience to do? What do you want them to walk away with? What action steps should they be taking?
As I said, pick a prisoner and follow them. If you need help finding them, you can contact me via CannabisSherry.com, or you can go on Facebook, find Craig's page, Free Craig Cecil. I also manage a page for Parker Coleman, who is a 33-year-old Black male who will be over 80 years old by the time his sentence is over. So Parker really needs help. So Craig's home, follow Parker's page, and let's get him out next.
I would just say, take the time, just like you did in high school, to study American history, to study the history of the drug war and know how to talk about it, know how to re-educate the people around you who don't know the history of it. It is truly shocking how the propaganda has really seeped into every part of mainstream media, and we have a lot of work to do to correct it. So I would say just, there's some really wonderful resources where you can really just get the talking points so you can know about the history of it, and start undoing some of the harms of the war on drugs just through, talking to people from an informed perspective.
And once you get informed, put your money where your mouth is. It's a capitalistic country. Money runs it.
That's right.
Mary Jane's point is awesome. Thank you, Mary Jane, for making that point. To know where you got to go, you got to know your history. There is a movie that's on Netflix. It's called The Grass is Greener. It's awesome. Go check it out. The gentleman that's in the Grass is Greener was incarcerated for a joint. He was sentenced for 13 years. He served 8 years. He had 10 kids that he had to leave behind. His name is Bernard Noble. Go learn his story. We're so excited. He's going to be our national national spokesperson on social justice for change with our organization. What I would like to encourage folks, if you're in the industry, go to our website, www.m4mmunited.org. We did an event in the month of June called More Than a Moment, Dismantling Systemic Racism. There is the event is there on our website. Check out the event. It was awesome. But more importantly, there's an action list. And that action list gives you 3 buckets. You have cannabis media companies, cannabis media and expo companies, cannabis corporations, as well as cannabis trade organizations and associations. And then you ask me, what do I need to do, Roz? What can I do? How can we make a difference? Go download that list and you will see prime examples of how you can make an impact. And you will see if you were on the accountability list that Mary Jane mentioned about CanInclusive and you didn't get a good grade, or if you felt like, man, what can I do to be better? Go look at that action list. It gives you prime examples of things that you can do to be better, to be intentional, and to make a positive change. So thank you guys for having me so much.
Yeah, and to both yours and Mary Jane's point, the uplifting those voices is hugely important. I went to law school in New Orleans, and just elevating the story of Bernard Noble has shifted a drastic amount of criminal justice reform in the last 4 or 5 years. So just having that story highlighted of a person with 2 joints and going, having a 13-year sentence, it has people thinking like, do we want habitual offender statutes to be on the books? Like, how did this happen, and how do we make this not happen in the future? Sorry to cut you guys off. Go ahead, Kyle.
If I can add in, number one, I want to give a tip of the cap to Susan for including this panel. This topic on this panel, I know it's probably not going to be her highest selling panel, but I know she's committed to social justice and social change. And so I really appreciate it. So tip of the cap to Susan, and also to all the panelists. What I will tell you is I played college basketball for a guy named George Raveling, who during the unrest went on one of the biggest podcasts in the country, Tim Ferriss. And Tim basically gave the mic to my old coach. And Coach Raveling was a civil rights guy his whole life. And he basically said his request to everybody is to be an agent for change. And so I was struggling after the unrest here. And so I would love to follow up with some of the panelists, because I would like to, and I don't want to sound crass if I say adopt, but I'd like to make one of the prisoners' plights my own. And I have a lot of wealthy investors that have helped stake the company. I also am very well politically connected, and also we have a media team. So I would really like to see if we can't shine the light by using one person, and also the company would certainly commit, if we can find somebody who would be paroled to California, to employ this person for at least a year and also give them free housing, so we can get them on their feet, educate them about this business. And then the other one is what I was talking about, being the former special ed teacher in South Central Los Angeles during the early 90s. We will be doing some internships. So to the extent that I can work with some of the folks on this panel, would really like to turn this good panel into some concrete changes that we can do open source. And I can encourage, I know a lot of the bigger players throughout the industry, you name the company, I probably know somebody in the C-suite. And so if we can do the right thing and show and walk our talk, I think that then it's easy to start, I wouldn't call shame, but encourage other companies that are in the position that we're in to see if we can help. And the last thing I would say to everybody, don't assume just because you're in the cannabis business, especially here in California, that you're making oodles of money. It's possible, but a lot are struggling along. So, but again, this is a wonderful opportunity. We're in a business that is federally illegal today, and we can do good things. So I look forward to working with you guys, and I was honored to sit on the panel with you today.
Nice. Thanks, Kyle. See, that's what I'm talking about. Go, Kyle. Putting our resources where our mouth is and where our ideology is. So I hope that everyone follows that example and knows our great action plans of how you can contribute and help. He just spelled it out for you. So I want to thank Susan for hosting this great panel. I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan now.
Thank you so much, Ileana. That was fantastic. I'm going to get you guys the copy of the video by Monday, and hopefully you can spread it out there far and wide, because this is something that everybody needs to experience. So thank you, and thank you panelists for participating today, and let's keep this going.